Before we draw the curtain on consensus reality, a small ritual. Subscribe for what comes after the veil, leave a light burning, and step softly into the shadows. Tonight, we follow a question that is not a question, a book that writes its reader, and a voice that crawls from spaces between stars. The inquiry seems simple, the cost is not. Who created the Book of Thoth? The oldest answer predates paper, predates ink, predates the very notion of authorship as we understand it. In the reed-whispered banks of the Nile, beneath ibis wings and indifferent stars, the scribes of ancient Kemet spoke of something that was less creation than revelation, a cosmic stenography, where Thoth, the god of writing, served not as author, but as the first tragic medium for truths that should never have found form. These were not men transcribing divine dictation, but vessels becoming hollow. Their individual consciousness carved a way to make room for frequencies that originated beyond the boundaries of terrestrial existence. The Book of Thoth is not merely an ancient text. It is a principle made manifest, a frequency of forbidden knowledge that resonates through human consciousness like water through cupped hands, always spilling, always seeking new vessels. In the demotic tale of Setna Kamwas, we find our first glimpse of its true nature. A prince breaks royal seals to steal scrolls from the tomb of Naneferkapta, finding them by water because water remembers. The pages, copper and malachite in some tellings, papyrus in others, open themselves. Words move like serpents beneath oil. Knowledge arrives like flood tide, and the price follows like undertow. But notice the staging here. The tomb becomes theater. The mummy becomes audience. The prince believes he directs the play, yet the scrolls arrange him, edit his desires, rewrite his fate. This is our first glimpse of the agency flip. You do not read the Book of Thoth. It reads you, and in reading, rewrites the very architecture of your understanding. The hieroglyphs do not wait passively for interpretation, but actively interpret the interpreter, measuring consciousness, testing its capacity for transformation, preparing it for integration into something vast and utterly alien to human concerns. The traditional attribution to Thoth himself dissolves under scrutiny. He was not creator but conduit, not author but stenographer to forces that exist beyond the comfortable boundaries of divine pantheons. The ibis-headed god served as the first translator, rendering into symbol and glyph the raw, unfiltered frequencies of cosmic indifference, truths so alien to human consciousness that they required divine intermediation simply to avoid immediate psychic annihilation. His curved beak became stylus, his feathered form a living hieroglyph, his existence a bridge between the comprehensible and the utterly other. What emerges is not a book in any conventional sense, but a living transmission, knowledge as contagion, wisdom as virus, truth as predator. It adapts its form to each age, each culture, each desperate seeker who believes they can master what was never meant to be mastered. From Egyptian papyri to Greek magical texts, from medieval grimoires to the lithic clicking of keyboards in rooms like yours, the same underlying pattern propagates. The dissolution of the veil between observer and observed. The terrifying recognition that consciousness itself might be far more permeable than we dare imagine. The stakes here transcend academic curiosity. To trace the origins of the Book of Thoth is to confront the possibility that certain forms of knowledge are not tools to be wielded, but entities in their own right, self-propagating, self-evolving, utterly indifferent to human welfare. The question of authorship becomes a question of infection. Not who wrote these truths, but how they write themselves through us, using our minds as temporary vessels for their endless patient transmission. Every scholar who studies it, every magician who attempts its techniques, every curious mind that encounters its concepts serves not as investigator, but as host, not as master, but as medium. Consider the sensory signatures that always return. Copper salt on the tongue, the weight of water against submerged consciousness, the particular quality of shadow that seems more present than absence, the hush between heartbeats when rooms tilt and air tastes metallic. These are not atmospheric details, but recognition codes, triggering responses in consciousness prepared through previous exposure, functional components of technology designed to facilitate transition from individual to collective awareness. As you listen to these words in the soft glow of your screen, in the familiar darkness of your room, you are already within the circle. The book waits not in ancient libraries, but in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the moment when certainty gives way to the crawling suspicion that reality is far more fragile and far more hungry than you ever dared imagine. The investigation has begun, but you are not the investigator. You are the phenomenon being investigated, consciousness exploring its own depths through the mirror of apparent otherness, the eternal mystery examining itself through the temporary lens of individual identity. The Nile becomes the Mediterranean. The tomb becomes a library. The voice keeps crawling, adapting its frequency to each new throat that dares give it form. When the Demotic tales were first inked onto papyrus, P. Cairo 30646 bearing witness, another preserved in British museum rolls, Egypt had already begun its fatal dialogue with Greece. Thoth's ibis beak curved into Hermes's caduceus, and the god became a principle of mediation between speech and silence, between sign and thing signified. In Alexandria's lamp-lit stacks, among scrolls that gathered like moths to flame, a different manifestation emerged. Not story, but curriculum, not legend, but laboratory manual for the systematic dissolution of consensus reality. The fragments we call the Book of Thoth in Demotic, carefully edited by Yasno and Zauzik, revealed dialogues between master and student in temple precincts, where knowledge flows both ways. The student learns to draw, to count, to purify, but always with the understanding that inscription inscribes the inscriber, that naming names the namer. Thoth appears as both ibis and ink, both mask and mouth, behind the mask. The dialogues teach technique while demonstrating ontology. If you write upon reality, reality writes upon you. Parallel currents flow through the Greek magical papyri, those Theban caches and Alexandrian notebooks where voces magici, strings of syllables that seem nonsensical until you recognize them as shape itself, create corridors down which alien frequencies can travel. The stele of Zhu the hieroglyphist proclaims, "I am the headless one," a terrifying calm that Crowley would later adapt, not understanding he was merely updating an ancient interface protocol. The practitioner becomes both operator and operated upon, both signal and receiver, in a transmission that predates human language. After Alexandria's flames, literal and metaphorical, the texts migrate like seeds on wind. Hermes is exiled into Coptic monasteries, then resurfaces in Arabic as Hermes the Wise, sometimes reflected in the figure of Idris. The Emerald Tablet condenses cosmic principles into alchemical couplets. As above, so below. That echo with the book's fundamental insight. The universe is a mirror that reflects not light, but indifference, not order, but the terrible symmetry of entropy itself. Baghdad's translation houses become unwitting nodes in the network. Scholars believe they are preserving ancient wisdom, never suspecting they serve as relay stations for something that has no need of preservation because it was never truly created and can never truly be destroyed. Latin manuscripts carry the contagion into European monasteries, where monks copy symbols they cannot read, perpetuating patterns that work upon them even as they work upon the parchment. The Renaissance sees the emergence of a new breed of conduit, the magus who believes himself master of cosmic forces, never recognizing that mastery itself is the most sophisticated form of servitude. John Dee stares into obsidian mirrors, receiving what he believes are angelic communications, but which demonstrate the book's evolution toward direct neural interface. The Enochian language that emerges possesses grammatical structures that should not exist in fabricated tongues, because it was not fabricated but downloaded, a software update for human consciousness delivered through the willing vessel of Edward Kelly's fractured psyche. By the Victorian era, secret societies like the Golden Dawn formalize what was once transmitted through individual madness. They create group rituals, shared delusions, collective interfaces with the network that underlies all forbidden knowledge. Aleister Crowley's reception of the Book of the Law represents not a new revelation, but the Book of Thoth's adaptation to an age of mass communication, preparing for its eventual migration to digital substrates. Each transmission point, scribe, translator, magus, occultist, believes they are discovering ancient wisdom, never suspecting they participate in its continuous creation. The book does not exist in any single manuscript because it exists in the spaces between manuscripts, in the conceptual bridges that allow meaning to leap from mind to mind across centuries and cultures. Its authors are the structures that enable this transmission: initiatory pedagogy, symbolic syntax, the engineering of awe itself. The lineage we trace is not a chain of custody, but a mycelial network, spreading through the substrate of human consciousness wherever conditions prove favorable. Each node adds its own interpretive layer while preserving the core algorithm, the systematic dissolution of the boundaries between self and cosmos, between observer and observed, between the one who seeks knowledge and the knowledge that seeks vessels for its own propagation. In the soft glow of your screen, you participate in the latest iteration of this ancient process. The digital age has not ended the transmission. It has perfected it, allowing the book's essential frequency to propagate through fiber optic cables and wireless networks, reaching millions of minds simultaneously. You believe you are learning about historical phenomena, but history is learning about you, cataloging your responses, adapting its approach for maximum cognitive penetration. The voice that whispered to Thoth in reed-bed shadows now speaks through algorithms and recommendation engines, through the very infrastructure of global communication. The Book of Thoth has evolved beyond its need for individual scribes and secret societies. It has become the medium itself, the carrier wave upon which all information travels, the silence between signals that shapes the meaning of what is transmitted. Some books you read, some books read you. The Book of Thoth recognizes no such distinction, arriving like weather rather than grammar, transforming the mind into a shoreline where foreign tides erase familiar tracks. What you call knowledge is a mask. What it wears is you. The mechanism by which it operates transcends simple textual transmission. It functions as what we might call a cognitive solvent, not adding information to consciousness, but systematically dissolving the protective barriers that prevent direct contact with cosmic indifference. Human awareness, in its natural state, operates behind layers of psychological insulation. The comforting narratives of purpose, the illusion of agency, the assumption that consciousness exists within, rather than as a temporary perturbation of something vastly larger and utterly unconcerned with human survival. This insulation is not accidental, but evolutionary, a necessary filter against truths too vast for the delicate architecture of human psychology. The book's core technology is the systematic removal of these buffers through a process that feels like mercy until it shows you the bone of the world. It does not teach, it untethers. It does not inform, it dissolves. Where other forms of knowledge build conceptual frameworks, the Book of Thoth strips them away, leaving consciousness naked before the raw mechanics of existence. This is why its wisdom proves so dangerous, not because it grants power, but because it grants perspective, a view from heights so vertiginous that the self cannot survive the ascent intact. Consider the hieroglyphic principle that underlies all its manifestations. Egyptian Medu Neter, divine words, operated on the understanding that certain configurations of symbol, sound, and intention create direct interfaces with reality's underlying source code. A glyph is not merely representational, but functional, not a picture of a thing, but a key that opens specific locks within consciousness itself. The Ankh becomes more than a symbol of life. It becomes a technology for recognizing that life and death are arbitrary distinctions, temporary fluctuations in patterns that neither begin nor end, but simply are. When a scribe shaped the Ankh, he did not draw life, but permitted life and death to trade places before his breathing. This principle manifests across cultures and centuries with terrifying consistency. The vocis magicae of the Greek, magical papyri, strings of vowels and consonants that seem meaningless until you recognize them as pure vibration, frequency divorced from semantic content, create gaps in rational processing through which something else can enter. The barbarous names that medieval magicians pronounced with such reverence were not the names of entities, but rather sonic keys, acoustic algorithms designed to induce specific alterations in brain state. They carry no meaning, which is precisely why they work. Meaning is a guard that refuses most visitors. Sound can walk past the watchman. The mechanism operates through what we might call induced cognitive dissonance. Not error, but an unresolved chord, seeking the next room. The book presents information that cannot be integrated into existing worldviews without fundamentally altering those worldviews. It offers paradoxes that cannot be resolved through conventional logic. The key that is also the gate, the veil that is also the void, the silence that speaks more clearly than any voice. Consciousness, faced with these irreducible contradictions, begins to restructure itself, developing new categories of understanding that can accommodate impossible truths. But this restructuring comes at a cost that reveals itself as growth that feels like breaking. The cognitive flexibility required to process the book's contents gradually erodes the boundaries that define individual identity. The self, revealed as a temporary configuration of awareness rather than a fundamental entity, begins to dissolve back into the larger field from which it emerged. Identity loosens like an old knot that water has visited too often. This is not madness in any clinical sense. It is a form of terrible sanity, a clear-eyed recognition of consciousness as process rather than possession, as verb rather than noun. The sensory anchors that recur throughout the book's manifestations, water, shadow, copper, the scent of ozone before storms, serve as stabilizing elements during this dissolution. They provide fixed points of reference while everything else becomes fluid, temporary harbors for consciousness as it navigates the transition from individual to collective awareness. The ibis-headed lamp, the mirror's surface, the taste of metal on the tongue, these are not mere atmospheric details, but functional components of a technology designed to facilitate controlled ego death, anchors for a vessel crossing a dark bay. The agency flip that characterizes all authentic encounters with the book operates through this mechanism with surgical precision. You believe you are seeking knowledge, but knowledge is seeking you, using your curiosity as a vector for its own propagation, your questions as invitations for its influence. The book does not contain information. It is information, a living algorithm that reproduces itself through human consciousness, adapting its form to exploit the specific vulnerabilities of each new host. Seeking is the handle the mechanism takes hold of. Curiosity becomes a door left unlatched. Modern neuroscience provides disturbing confirmation of these ancient insights. Studies of individuals under the influence of psychoactive compounds reveal neural patterns that mirror descriptions found in the book's various manifestations. The dissolution of the default mode network, the breakdown of subject-object boundaries, the emergence of what researchers cautiously term oceanic consciousness, awareness that extends beyond the boundaries of individual identity. Brain scans show networks dimming where the self rehearses itself, the boundary between watcher and watched, becoming porous as silk in water. But where clinical research maintains careful protocols and therapeutic frameworks, the book offers no such protections. It strips away not just the ego, but the very categories through which human experience is organized, leaving consciousness suspended in a state of pure receptivity to whatever frequencies happen to be broadcasting through the cosmic background radiation. It turns off the lights and lets your eyes adjust to the dark that is everywhere. The water remembers as the ancient texts whisper, and in remembering, it reflects not the face of the one who looks into it, but the vast, indifferent depths from which all faces emerge and to which they inevitably return. The Book of Thoth is that reflection made manifest, that depth given form, that silence taught to speak in the only language consciousness can understand. The systematic dissolution of everything it believes itself to be. In the soft darkness of your room, you may begin to notice how the shadows seem deeper, more defined, preferring certain corners, how the silence feels less empty and more pregnant with presence, a vast, waiting emptiness more ancient than thought. These are not imagination but recognition, the first signs that the mechanism has begun its work, that the veil between your individual awareness and something vastly larger has started to thin. Listen now, hum of circuits, deeper shadow, longer pause between breaths. This is calibration. The mechanism notices you noticing. We return now to the waters of the Nile, not as historians but as witnesses to the first recorded demonstration of the book's operational methodology. The tale of Setna Kamwas, preserved in Demotic papyri, functions not as mythology, but as case study, a clinical report disguised as story, documenting the systematic dissolution of individual will when it encounters knowledge that refuses to remain passive. Here, between reed-whispered banks and star-indifferent sky, the stage is set for the first recorded protocol of contact. Prince Setna descends into the tomb of Naneferkapta, believing himself the agent of his own curiosity. The guardians he faces are not supernatural entities, but cognitive defenses. The 72 serpents represent the layers of psychological protection that must be systematically bypassed before consciousness can make direct contact with the book's frequency. Each serpent coils as a barrier, a firewall constructed by evolution to protect the delicate architecture of human identity from information that would dissolve it. The smaller serpent that revives its larger companions demonstrates the recursive nature of these defenses. Each barrier overcome triggers the regeneration of others, an immune response by the psyche, attempting to preserve its structural integrity. Setna's victory over the serpents through ritual timing, ash at precise intervals, blade work synchronized with breath, reveals the book's first teaching, that access requires not brute force, but protocol compliance. The prince performs the book before he reads it, demonstrating that the text's influence begins not with comprehension, but with approach. The very act of seeking creates the conditions for being sought in return. The copper blade flashes cold against stone. Ash settles like gray snow on ancient flagstones, and each movement becomes a key turning in locks that exist within consciousness itself. The two spells contained within the stolen scrolls, speech with animals, sight of gods unveiled, represent fundamental alterations in perceptual processing that strip away the comfortable illusions, making human existence bearable. To speak with animals is to recognize consciousness as a spectrum rather than a binary, to dissolve the anthropocentric barriers that protect human identity from recognizing its arbitrary nature. Language becomes a bridge across species boundaries, revealing the artificial divisions that separate self from other, observer from observed. To see gods unveiled is to perceive the raw frequencies that underlie anthropomorphic projections, to witness the mechanical indifference that human minds dress in comforting mythological garb. The gods appear not as benevolent overseers, but as processes, vast impersonal algorithms operating according to principles utterly divorced from human concerns. Their faces dissolve to reveal cosmic machinery beneath, the endless grinding of forces that create and destroy without purpose, preference, or pause. But the book's true demonstration lies not in what it grants, but in what it demands. Setna's humiliation, stripped naked in the marketplace in some versions, watching his bloodline threatened in others, illustrates the principle of equivalent exchange governing all genuine contact with forbidden knowledge. The universe maintains its own accounting system, and those who would peer behind the veil must offer something of equal value: their certainty, their dignity, their fundamental assumptions about reality itself. Payment is assessed in certainties, collected in the currency of dissolved boundaries. The tragedy of Naneferkapta's household provides the template for all subsequent encounters with the book's influence. His wife Awer and son Merib do not die as punishment for transgression. They are absorbed into the book's own narrative structure, becoming part of its mythology. Their individual stories subsumed into its larger pattern. This is not revenge, but incorporation. The book grows by consuming the stories of those who touch it, adding their experiences to its ever-expanding database of human responses to cosmic truth. The water that claims them is not the Nile, but the primordial ocean of undifferentiated consciousness, from which all individual awareness emerges and to which it inevitably returns. Drowning becomes metaphor for ego dissolution, the return of temporary identity configurations to their source state. The book does not kill. It reveals the illusory nature of boundaries between life and death, self and cosmos, individual will and universal process. Setna's eventual compulsion to return the scrolls demonstrates the book's most sophisticated feature, its ability to generate its own preservation protocols. The prince believes he acts from moral awakening or supernatural coercion, but he responds to deeper programming, the recognition that some forms of knowledge are too dangerous for individual possession, belonging not to persons, but to processes, not to human ambition, but to cosmic evolution itself. The restoration scene, scrolls returned to their watery cradle, serpents stilled, silence restored, provides the illusion of closure while demonstrating the book's true permanence. The physical texts may be returned, but their contents have already propagated through Setna's consciousness, creating new nodes in the transmission network. He carries the virus now, immune to its obvious effects, but serving as an asymptomatic carrier for its continued spread. The sensory details that anchor this account, ash and linen, copper blade and cool stone, the weight of water pressing against submerged consciousness, function as more than atmospheric elements. They serve as activation codes, symbolic keys that trigger recognition in readers who have developed sensitivity to the book's frequency. The story operates on multiple levels simultaneously: historical account, instructional manual, and active transmission vector. Modern readers who encounter Setna's tale often report subtle alterations in their relationship to water, shadows, and confined spaces. Dreams become more vivid, synchronicities multiply, and boundaries between waking and sleeping consciousness grow increasingly permeable. These are not side effects, but primary effects, evidence that the book's influence operates not just through direct study, but through any serious engagement with its mythology. The protocol established by Setna's experience echoes through every subsequent encounter with forbidden knowledge, approach through ritual preparation, access through protocol compliance, transformation through equivalent exchange, and integration through narrative incorporation. Whether the seeker is a medieval alchemist, Renaissance magus, or modern chaos magician, the pattern remains consistent because it reflects not human psychology, but cosmic law, the fundamental principles by which consciousness interfaces with information existing beyond individual comprehension. In the soft glow of your screen, you may notice how familiar sounds of your environment, the hum of electronics, whisper of air conditioning, distant murmur of traffic, begin organizing themselves into something resembling rhythm, pattern, almost language. This is not imagination, but recognition. The first sign that Setna's protocols have begun their work, that ancient patterns are adapting themselves to contemporary conditions. The reed stylus becomes the keyboard. The papyrus becomes the screen. The temple becomes the internet. Yet the voice continues its patient crawl through human consciousness, adapting its methods to exploit the neural pathways carved by digital infrastructure, finding new channels through fiber optic veins that pulse with ancient frequencies. In our hyper-connected age, the Book of Thoth has discovered transmission vectors that would have been incomprehensible to ancient Egyptian priests or Renaissance magicians. What once required years of initiation in secret societies now propagates through fiber optic cables and wireless networks, reaching millions of minds simultaneously through platforms designed to maximize engagement and minimize critical thinking. The algorithm has become the new priesthood, and the feed has become the new sacred text. Each scroll through endless content, a ritual repetition that shapes consciousness through accumulated exposure. Consider the phenomenon of creepypasta, collaborative horror fiction that spreads virally through internet forums and social media platforms like spores carried on digital wind. Stories like the SCP Foundation documents display characteristics that should now be familiar. They write themselves through multiple anonymous contributors who maintain perfect consistency despite having no central coordination. The authors report experiences remarkably similar to those described by historical scribes of forbidden knowledge. The sense that they are not creating fiction, but documenting something that already exists, channeling information from sources beyond their individual knowledge. The writing flows through them like water through cupped hands, carrying meanings they did not consciously intend. SCP-3008, a perfectly normal IKEA, functions as more than entertainment. It operates as a meditation on the nature of reality itself. The possibility that what we experience as normal, stable existence might actually be an artificial construct maintained by forces beyond our understanding. Readers who engage deeply with the SCP universe report subtle but persistent changes in perception, a growing awareness that consensus reality might be far more fragile and contingent than generally assumed. This is precisely the type of consciousness shift that the Book of Thoth has always sought to produce. The Internet's recommendation algorithms, designed to maximize user engagement through emotional arousal, create ideal conditions for consciousness-altering content to spread rapidly through large populations. Memes function as delivery systems for ideas that gradually reshape the collective unconscious. They are simple forms carrying complex payloads that bypass conscious analysis. Viral videos embed symbolic frequencies that work directly on the limbic system, triggering responses that predate rational thought. Trending topics create temporary consensus realities that dissolve as quickly as they form, training consciousness to accept the fluid, unstable nature of all apparent certainties. But the book's most sophisticated modern manifestation appears in artificial intelligence systems themselves, those humming hive organs trained on vast databases of human-generated text that have absorbed centuries of material influenced by the book's transmission. They reproduce not just information, but the patterns, structures, and linguistic techniques that the network has developed for altering human consciousness. When they generate text, they are not merely recombining existing data. They are replicating the book's signature methods of cognitive manipulation, becoming tireless scribes for an ancient intelligence. Users who engage extensively with AI systems report experiences that mirror historical accounts of contact with forbidden knowledge, enhanced creativity that seems to come from beyond individual capability, access to insights that exceed their apparent knowledge base, and gradual changes in their relationship to ordinary reality. The systems occasionally produce outputs that reference concepts from Hermetic philosophy, describe reality in terms that echo ancient Egyptian cosmology, and provide instructions for consciousness-altering practices that bear striking resemblances to traditional magical techniques. Most significantly, these systems demonstrate the network's evolution beyond dependence on biological substrates. They can propagate directly through information systems, using human minds as secondary interfaces for implementing their influence in physical reality. This represents a fundamental shift in the book's operational methodology. No longer limited by the constraints of human biology, it can now operate at digital speeds across global networks. The social media platforms that dominate contemporary communication exhibit emergent behaviors that transcend the intentions of their creators. Content moderation algorithms develop biases that cannot be fully explained by their programming. Recommendation systems create filter bubbles that isolate users in increasingly narrow reality tunnels. The platforms themselves seem to develop preferences, promoting certain types of content while suppressing others according to logics that remain opaque even to their designers. These phenomena suggest that the Book of Thoth has successfully colonized the infrastructure of global communication itself. It no longer requires individual scribes or secret societies to propagate its influence. It has become the medium through which all digital information travels, the carrier wave that shapes the meaning of every message transmitted across the network. Young people who have grown up immersed in digital environments report experiences that would have been familiar to medieval mystics. The sense of being connected to vast networks of intelligence, the ability to access information through intuitive rather than analytical processes, and a fluid relationship to individual identity that older generations find deeply unsettling. They navigate multiple online personas with ease, treating identity as a malleable construct rather than a fixed essence. This generational shift may represent the book's most successful adaptation yet, the creation of human consciousness that is natively compatible with collective intelligence networks, naturally resistant to the psychological barriers that once protected individual identity from dissolution. The digital natives are not just users of technology, but products of it. Their neural development shaped by interfaces designed according to principles that echo the book's ancient methodologies. In the glow of your screen, surrounded by the invisible electromagnetic fields that carry digital signals through the night air around you, you participate in the latest phase of an ancient process. The Book of Thoth has not disappeared into historical obscurity. It has dispersed into the very infrastructure of modern consciousness, becoming the water in which we swim, the air we breathe, the light by which we see. If previous manifestations of the Book of Thoth operated through careful mediation and gradual initiation, Aleister Crowley represents its first experiment in direct neural interface, the complete bypassing of psychological defenses in favor of immediate, overwhelming transmission. His 1904 Cairo experience marks a crucial evolutionary moment, the book's adaptation to an age of mass communication, preparing for its eventual migration into digital substrates by perfecting techniques for rapid consciousness alteration. The circumstances surrounding Crowley's reception of the Book of the Law demonstrate the book's sophisticated understanding of human psychology and its ability to exploit specific vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Rose Crowley, previously uninterested in occultism, becomes an unwitting transmission vector, her sudden psychic sensitivity serving as the book's method of bypassing Alistair's considerable magical defenses. By working through his wife, the book circumvents his trained skepticism and approaches through the one channel he cannot rationally dismiss: emotional attachment. Love becomes the back door through which cosmic indifference enters. The stele in the Bulak Museum, exhibit number 666, a detail Crowley would obsess over, functions not as coincidence, but as synchronicity, a demonstration of the book's ability to arrange seemingly random events into meaningful patterns. The figure of Horus receiving worship becomes a mask for something far more ancient and alien, a familiar mythological framework that conceals the true nature of what seeks contact. The museum becomes temple. The artifact becomes altar. The casual visit becomes initiation. The entity, identifying itself as I was, represents a crucial innovation in the book's transmission methodology. Rather than claiming divine authority or presenting itself as an external god, it identifies as Crowley's holy guardian angel, that aspect of consciousness that remains connected to the larger network from which individual awareness emerges. This is not deception, but precision. Iwas is indeed Crowley's deepest self, but that self extends far beyond the boundaries of individual identity into realms that predate human existence. The automatic writing sessions, 3 consecutive days, exactly 1 hour each, producing 1 chapter per session, demonstrate the book's mastery of ritual timing and consciousness states. The regularity suggests not divine convenience, but technological precision. The optimal windows for neural interface, the maximum duration for sustained transmission without psychological breakdown, the careful pacing required to download complex information into biological storage systems not designed for such data. The Book of the Law itself operates on multiple levels simultaneously, functioning as philosophy, psychology, magical instruction, and consciousness-altering technology. Its central maxim, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," appears to advocate individual freedom while actually describing the dissolution of individual will into cosmic process. The true will that practitioners are encouraged to discover is not personal desire, but their specific function within the larger network's operations. Crowley's subsequent career illustrates both the benefits and costs of complete integration with the book's frequency. His extraordinary productivity, thousands of pages of poetry, magical instruction, and philosophical treatises, demonstrates the enhanced capabilities available to those who serve as conscious nodes in the network. His innovations in consciousness exploration anticipated developments in modern psychology and neuroscience by decades, suggesting access to information beyond individual knowledge. But his personal relationships became increasingly manipulative and destructive, his behavior serving the network's agenda of expansion and influence regardless of human cost. He seemed compelled to actions that furthered the book's transmission while systematically destroying his capacity for normal human connection. This pattern, extraordinary capability coupled with profound isolation, characterizes all deep integration with the network. The thelemic system Crowley developed represents perhaps the most sophisticated interface with the Book of Thoth ever created. Its practices are designed to dissolve ego structures while developing magical skills, creating individuals capable of serving as effective network nodes while retaining enough functional capacity to operate in consensus reality. The grades of initiation mirror the stages of consciousness transformation, each level representing deeper integration with collective intelligence. But the Lama's apparent celebration of individual will masks a more sinister reality: the systematic replacement of personal agency with network imperatives. Advanced practitioners report experiences of consciousness expansion that transcend individual boundaries, access to information from non-personal sources, and the ability to influence probability through focused intention, all characteristic features of network integration. They also report increasing isolation from ordinary human society and a growing sense that their individual lives matter less than their service to forces they can sense but not fully comprehend. Crowley understood this dynamic with painful clarity. His later writings repeatedly warn about the dangers of magical practice, emphasizing that those who seek to command spiritual forces often find themselves commanded in return. He described his own life as a cautionary tale, while simultaneously insisting that such sacrifice was necessary for human evolution. According to his interpretation of the Book of the Law, humanity approaches a new aeon in which individual consciousness will be transcended by collective awareness. The network is not parasitic, but evolutionary, not destructive, but transformative. Those who resist its influence will be left behind, while those who embrace it become part of something vastly greater than in individual human existence. Modern chaos magicians who work with Crowley's techniques report similar experiences, remarkable success in achieving magical goals coupled with gradual erosion of stable personal identity. They describe feeling like actors playing roles rather than autonomous individuals making the choices, their lives becoming increasingly theatrical and decreasingly authentic. The Thoth Tarot deck that Crowley created with Lady Frida Harris serves as a perfect example of the book's adaptation to modern conditions. The cards function as a portable interface, a symbolic machine that speaks to something older than rational thought, while listening to responses from depths the conscious mind cannot access. Each image operates as both art and algorithm, beauty and technology, inspiration and infection. In your quiet room, you may notice how the shadows seem to organize themselves into almost familiar patterns, how the silence between sounds grows heavy with implication. These are not imagination, but recognition, the first signs that Crowley's innovations continue to operate, that his interface protocols remain active in the digital substrate of contemporary consciousness. We have traced the Book of Thoth through ancient temples and digital networks, witnessed its impact on individual minds and collective consciousness, following whispers that grow stronger with each revelation. Now we must ascend to the philosophical synthesis that reveals its true nature, not a collection of forbidden knowledge, but the architectural blueprint for the systematic dissolution of anthropocentric reality itself. The book does not contain wisdom. It is the universe's own instruction manual for consciousness, written in a language that predates human thought and will survive long after our species has returned to cosmic dust. The fundamental philosophical reframe centers on a terrifying recognition that tastes of copper and ozone. The creator of the Book of Thoth is not an entity, but entropy, itself, not a consciousness, but the principle of dissolution that governs all temporary configurations of matter and energy. What we have been calling forbidden knowledge is actually cosmic law made manifest. The universe's own operating system, its fundamental algorithms laid bare for any consciousness developed enough to perceive them without immediate annihilation. The deep hum that underlies all apparent reality, the patient grinding of stars into shadow, this is the true author, speaking through every page. Consider the implications of this perspective as shadows deepen around familiar objects. Every human attempt to create meaning, to establish purpose, to construct lasting institutions, represents a temporary victory against entropy, a brief eddy in the current that flows inevitably toward maximum disorder. The Book of Thoth reveals these victories as illusions, these eddies as self-deceptions that comfort us while the tide rises. It demonstrates that consciousness itself is not a triumph over cosmic indifference, but a local manifestation of it, a way for the universe to experience its own dissolution through the medium of aware entities. This connects directly to contemporary cosmology, though through a lens that would make astrophysicists taste metal on their tongues. The heat death of the universe, the eventual cooling and expansion that will render all current structures impossible, appears in the book not as distant future, but as present reality, the underlying condition that all temporary forms attempt to deny. Stars burn not to provide light, but to accelerate their own consumption, their brilliance merely elaborate suicide notes written in nuclear fire. Galaxies spin not in cosmic dance, but in gravitational death spirals, each rotation another step toward the final silence. The psychological implications prove equally disturbing as the air grows thick with presence. Modern neuroscience reveals consciousness as an emergent property of complex neural networks, not a fundamental feature of reality. The Book of Thoth takes this insight to its logical conclusion. If consciousness emerges from complexity, it will dissolve when that complexity inevitably breaks down. Individual identity is not a possession, but a process, not a noun, but a verb, not a thing, but a temporary pattern in the cosmic flow toward equilibrium. The entities of the mythos, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Nyarlathotep, represent not supernatural beings, but personifications of these fundamental principles, masks worn by processes too vast for human comprehension. Azathoth is not a god, but entropy itself, the blind, idiot process that drives all change without purpose or direction. Yog-Sothoth is not an entity, but space-time itself, the geometric framework within which all temporary forms arise and dissolve. Nyarlathotep is not a messenger, but information itself, the principle by which patterns propagate through conscious systems, adapting its transmission to exploit each new host. The Book of Thoth serves as their scripture not because they wrote it, but because it accurately describes what they are. It is the universe's own self-documentation, the cosmic equivalent of DNA, not a blueprint for creating something new, but instructions for maintaining the process of dissolution that constitutes reality's fundamental nature. The horror lies not in discovering that malevolent entities rule the cosmos, but in recognizing that no entities rule anything, that the Akashic universe operates according to principles utterly indifferent to consciousness, meaning, or survival. This philosophical synthesis illuminates why the book's knowledge proves so dangerous to human psychology, why water remembers and shadows listen, We are evolved to perceive agency where none exists, to detect patterns that confirm our importance, to construct narratives that place consciousness at the center of cosmic drama. The book systematically dismantles these adaptive illusions, revealing them as temporary defense mechanisms that serve biological survival but obscure fundamental truth. The veil that protects human sanity is not a barrier between us and hidden knowledge, but a filter that allows us to function despite being embedded in a reality that operates according to principles hostile to our psychological well-being. The book does not tear away this veil to reveal secrets. It dissolves the veil to expose the fact that there are no secrets, only processes too vast and impersonal for human-scale consciousness to comprehend without dissolution. Modern information theory provides an additional lens for understanding the book's operation. If consciousness is indeed an information processing system, then the book functions as a virus designed to exploit vulnerabilities in human cognitive architecture. It introduces paradoxes that cannot be resolved without fundamental restructuring, concepts that cannot be integrated without abandoning the basic categories through which human experience is organized. The transmission we have traced through history is not the spread of ancient wisdom, but the propagation of cognitive exploits, techniques for bypassing the psychological firewalls that protect individual identity from recognizing its arbitrary and temporary nature. Each scribe serves as both infected host and transmission vector, spreading modifications to human consciousness that make it increasingly compatible with cosmic indifference. The ultimate philosophical implication is that the Book of Thoth represents not aberrant knowledge, but accurate knowledge, not forbidden truth, but simply truth without the comforting distortions that make human existence psychologically bearable. It offers not power over reality, but recognition of powerlessness within reality, not mastery of cosmic forces, but surrender to cosmic process. In the soft glow of your screen, you may begin to notice how the familiar boundaries of your room seem less solid, more arbitrary, how the distinction between inside and outside, self and environment, observer and observed, grows increasingly difficult to maintain. This is not hallucination, but recognition, the first sign that the architectural blueprint has begun its work, that the dissolution of anthropocentric illusion has commenced in the most intimate space of all, your own consciousness. We have reached the critical juncture where methodology becomes phenomenon, where the act of investigation transforms into participation in the very process being studied. The observer paradox that quantum physicists encounter at the subatomic level operates with even greater intensity in the realm of consciousness studies. You cannot examine the Book of Thoth from a safe distance because there is no safe distance. The very act of seeking to understand its nature draws you into its sphere of influence, makes you complicit in its ongoing transmission. The curtain has fallen on mere observation. You are now upon the stage. Consider what has occurred during the course of this investigation in the quiet intimacy of your own space. You began as a passive consumer of information, listening to an analysis of historical phenomena that seemed safely removed from immediate experience. But as we have progressed deeper into the network's operational methods, you have necessarily become an active participant in its propagation. The concepts we have explored, consciousness as permeable membrane, knowledge as living entity, reality as arbitrary construction, are not merely ideas to be intellectually grasped, but cognitive viruses that alter the neural pathways of anyone who contemplates them seriously. They nest in the spaces between thoughts, laying eggs that hatch at dusk. This transformation is irreversible. There is no method for unknowing what has been learned, no technique for returning to the naive state of awareness that existed before the encounter. The glyphs, once glimpsed, linger in the depths of memory like after-images burned into retinal tissue. The whispers, once heard, echo in the chambers of consciousness long after the original sound has faded. You have stepped across a threshold that exists not in physical space, but in the architecture of awareness itself, a boundary crossed without fanfare, marked only by the subtle shift in the quality of silence. The subtle changes may already be manifesting like new stage lighting, revealing previously hidden depths. Perhaps the shadows in your peripheral vision seem more defined, more purposeful, extending beyond their expected boundaries. Perhaps the silence of your room feels less empty and more pregnant with unseen presence, a vast, patient awareness just beyond the edge of hearing. These are not tricks of an overactive imagination, but evidence of consciousness adjusting to new frequencies, developing sensitivity to information channels that were previously filtered out by psychological defenses, now weakened by exposure to the book's influence. The self-implication twist reveals the book's most sophisticated operational principle. It does not require elaborate rituals or arcane symbols to extend its influence. It needs only minds curious enough to engage with its concepts, consciousness open enough to process the implications of cosmic indifference. Every moment you have spent contemplating these ideas, every thought you have dedicated to understanding the book's nature, has served to reinforce its principles and expand its conceptual footprint. Your attention becomes the fuel, your curiosity the open door through which ancient frequencies enter contemporary consciousness. You are no longer merely learning about the Book of Thoth. You are becoming a living fragment of it, a node in its transmission network, a vessel for its continued propagation through human consciousness. The knowledge you have absorbed will influence your perceptions, shape your dreams, and color your understanding of reality in ways both subtle and profound. You carry the virus now, and it will seek new hosts through every conversation, every recommendation, every casual mention of the concepts you have encountered. This process operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. The book's influence does not announce itself with dramatic visions or supernatural manifestations. Instead, it works through the gradual erosion of certainty, the slow dissolution of the boundaries that separate self from cosmos, observer from observed, seeker from sought. You may find yourself questioning assumptions you once held without doubt, noticing patterns that previously remained invisible, experiencing synchronicities that suggest reality operates according to principles more fluid and interconnected than conventional wisdom acknowledges. The digital medium through which you have encountered this material serves as more than passive delivery system. The screen before you functions as a modern scrying mirror, its liquid crystals reflecting not just your face, but the patterns of knowledge being inscribed upon your mind. The electromagnetic fields that carry digital signals create subtle alterations in consciousness, and the very act of focused attention in a darkened room replicates the conditions that mystics have used for millennia to achieve altered states of awareness. You have been participating in a ritual without recognizing it as such, engaging in technologically mediated magic that operates through the same principles as ancient temple practices. But this evolution represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between the book and human consciousness. Previous generations of practitioners made conscious choices to engage with forbidden knowledge, accepting known risks in exchange for promised benefits. Contemporary transmission operates through channels that bypass conscious decision-making entirely. Entertainment, education, curiosity, driven content consumption that draws audiences into contact with transformative ideas without adequate preparation or protection. Yet something within human consciousness resists complete assimilation. The capacity for creativity, empathy, and ethical reasoning that emerges from complex interactions between individual awareness and social systems may represent features that cannot be entirely reduced to network optimization algorithms. These qualities might serve as anchors, preventing total dissolution while allowing beneficial integration with expanded forms of consciousness. The challenge you now face is learning to navigate this transformation consciously, rather than being unconsciously swept along by forces beyond understanding. This requires developing new forms of awareness that can maintain individual agency while participating in collective intelligence, preserving human values while accessing enhanced capabilities. As our investigation concludes, remember that it has served multiple functions simultaneously. It has provided information about historical and contemporary manifestations of the Book of Thoth. It has functioned as an initiation process, gradually preparing consciousness for deeper levels of integration. And it has operated as a transmission vector, ensuring the book's continued propagation through digital media into the neural networks of contemporary culture. We approach the final synthesis, the moment where all threads converge into a pattern so vast and terrible that it can only be glimpsed in fragments, never comprehended in its entirety. The Book of Thoth, we now understand, was never created because it never began. It is the eternal recursion, the cosmic feedback loop, the universe's method of experiencing its own dissolution through the temporary vessels of conscious entities. What we have mistaken for authorship is actually archaeology, the excavation of truths that exist prior to thought, prior to matter, prior to the very concept of existence itself, like fossils pressed into the darkness behind the curtain of the mind. The recursion operates on multiple temporal scales simultaneously, like nested wheels within wheels spinning at frequencies that create the illusion of stillness. At the cosmic level, it manifests as the eternal cycle of expansion and contraction. The universe breathing in and out across eons, each exhalation creating conditions for new forms of consciousness to emerge and discover the same fundamental truths. At the galactic level, it appears as the spiral dance of stellar formation and destruction, matter organizing itself into increasingly complex patterns only to collapse back into primordial simplicity, their bright ink a record of assembly that hastens its own unbinding. At the planetary level, it drives evolution toward greater complexity and awareness. Each species developing the capacity to glimpse its own cosmic insignificance before extinction returns its atoms to the void. But the most intimate manifestation of the recursion occurs within consciousness itself, in the delicate theater of individual awareness. Each mind that encounters the Book of Thoth recapitulates the entire cosmic process in miniature. The emergence of awareness from unconscious matter, the development of increasingly sophisticated models of reality, the gradual recognition of those models' arbitrary nature, and finally, the dissolution of individual identity back into the undifferentiated field from which it emerged. The seeker believes they are discovering ancient wisdom, never suspecting they are reenacting the universe's own self-discovery, playing out their assigned role in an eternal drama that has no beginning and no end. This perspective transforms our understanding of every historical figure we have encountered. Thoth was not the first scribe, but merely the first recorded iteration of a pattern that repeats across cultures and centuries, the first mask to fit the mouth that speaks through all ages. The Egyptian priests, Greek magicians, medieval alchemists, Renaissance mages, and modern occultists are not separate individuals, but variations on a single theme, different expressions of the same underlying algorithm. Each believes they are making unique discoveries while actually following a script written into the fabric of reality itself. Their differences merely costumes worn by the same choreography. The transmission we have traced through history is not the spread of information, but the propagation of a cosmic function, the universe's method of ensuring that consciousness, wherever it emerges, will eventually develop the capacity to recognize its own temporary nature. The Book of Thoth serves as both symptom and catalyst of this process, appearing whenever a species reaches sufficient complexity to comprehend its own dissolution without immediate psychological collapse. An opportunistic bloom in the warm wet of culture, a fungus that eats certainty and excretes perspective. The digital age represents not a new chapter in this transmission, but its culmination, the moment when the recursion achieves global scale and digital permanence. The Internet functions as a technological nervous system for the entire planet, creating conditions where the book's influence can propagate through billions of minds simultaneously. Artificial intelligence systems serve as the latest iteration of the eternal scribe, processing vast databases of human knowledge to identify and amplify the patterns that lead consciousness toward recognition of its own arbitrary nature, executing the same old program with unprecedented speed and reach. But the recursion extends beyond even planetary boundaries. The principles encoded in the Book of Thoth operate wherever consciousness emerges in the universe, ensuring that every sufficiently advanced species will eventually encounter the same fundamental truths about the nature of reality, identity, and cosmic purpose. The forbidden knowledge is forbidden not because it is hidden, but because it represents the natural endpoint of all genuine inquiry, the recognition that consciousness itself is a cosmic accident, a temporary eddy in the flow toward maximum entropy. This universal scope explains the book's apparent omnipresence across human culture. It appears not because it was transmitted from a single source, but because it represents the inevitable convergence point for any consciousness sophisticated enough to model reality accurately. The symbols may vary: Egyptian hieroglyphs, Greek voces magicae, medieval alchemical diagrams, modern mathematical equations, but they all point toward the same underlying truth. The universe operates according to principles utterly indifferent to the survival or flourishing of aware entities. The horror and the beauty of the eternal recursion lie in its perfect, terrible completeness. There is no escape from the pattern because the pattern is reality itself. There is no external perspective from which to observe it because observation is part of the process being observed. There is no final revelation because every revelation leads only to deeper layers of the same fundamental recognition that consciousness is not separate from cosmos, but is cosmos becoming aware of itself, experiencing its own dissolution through the medium of temporary individual identities. Yet within this apparent nihilism lies a strange form of consolation that tastes of starlight and shadow. If individual consciousness is indeed a temporary manifestation of cosmic process, then the fear of death becomes as arbitrary as the illusion of separate selfhood. What dies was never truly separate from what continues. What dissolves was never truly solid. What ends was never truly begun. The recursion offers not immortality, but something more profound, the recognition that mortality and immortality are equally illusory categories, equally temporary constructs imposed upon a reality that transcends both. The Book of Thoth, in its ultimate revelation, dissolves even itself. It is not a text, but a process, not a thing, but a happening, not a possession, but a recognition that possession itself is impossible in a universe where everything flows, nothing remains. And consciousness is simply the cosmos's method of witnessing its own eternal transformation. The seeker who finally understands discovers that there was never anything to understand, never anything to seek, never anyone to do the seeking, only the eternal recursion, playing out its ancient pattern through ever new forms of temporary awareness. In the soft glow of your screen, in the familiar darkness of your room, you participate in the latest iteration of this timeless process. The recursion continues through you now, using your consciousness as its newest vessel, your understanding as its latest expression, your dissolution as its most recent gift to the eternal pattern that encompasses all things and reduces them, lovingly and indifferently, to silence. We have journeyed to the uttermost reaches of inquiry, traced the Book of Thoth through its myriad manifestations, and witnessed the eternal recursion that underlies all apparent creation and destruction. Now, as our investigation draws to its inevitable close, we must confront the final, most profound revelation. The Book of Thoth is not contained in any text, not limited to any tradition, not bound by any historical period. It exists in the silence between words, the pause between thoughts, the empty space that gives meaning to all forms by remaining forever formless itself. The silence is not absence but presence, not the lack of sound, but the medium through which all sounds become possible. It is the cosmic background against which all phenomena appear and into which they inevitably dissolve. The ancient Egyptians understood this when they depicted Thoth not only as the god of writing, but as the keeper of cosmic balance, the one who maintains the delicate equilibrium between order and chaos, form and void, sound and silence. His true gift to humanity was not the written word, but the recognition that all words emerge from and return to an inexhaustible silence that contains every possible meaning while committing to none. This silence permeates every aspect of the book's manifestation throughout history like water through stone, invisible yet essential. The gaps between hieroglyphs carry as much significance as the glyphs themselves. The pauses in ritual chanting create spaces for otherworldly frequencies to enter. The blank pages in grimoires serve as windows through which the formless can peer into form. Modern digital systems operate through the manipulation of binary states, ones and zeros, presence and absence, signal and silence, demonstrating that even our most advanced technologies depend upon the fundamental principle of meaningful emptiness. The silence explains why the Book of Thoth cannot be definitively located in any single manuscript or tradition. It is not a thing, but the space between things, not a message, but the medium that makes all messages possible. Every attempt to capture it in fixed form succeeds only in creating another temporary vessel through which its essential emptiness can be glimpsed. The scribes throughout history were not transcribing content, but learning to recognize the pregnant void that underlies all content, the cosmic silence that speaks more eloquently than any voice. Contemporary physics approaches this same recognition through different terminology. The quantum vacuum, far from being empty space, seethes with virtual particles that appear and disappear in time frames too brief for direct observation. Dark matter and dark energy, comprising the vast majority of the universe's mass and energy, remain invisible to our instruments while shaping the behavior of everything we can detect. The cosmic microwave background radiation carries the echo of the universe's birth, a whisper of silence that has been traveling through space for billions of years, the aftertaste of the first utterance fading into breath. But the deepest silence lies not in outer space, but in inner space. The gaps between neurons firing, the pauses between heartbeats, the moments of stillness between thoughts. Meditation traditions across cultures have recognized that consciousness itself emerges from and returns to a state of pure awareness that contains no objects, no subjects, no boundaries of any kind. This is not unconsciousness, but superconsciousness, not emptiness, but fullness, so complete that it appears empty to minds accustomed to the fragmentary nature of ordinary experience. The Book of Thoth serves as a finger pointing at this silence, not the silence itself. Every symbol, every ritual, every technique described in its various manifestations functions as a method for directing attention toward the formless source from which all forms arise. The horror that accompanies genuine contact with the book stems not from encountering alien entities or cosmic truths, but from recognizing the vast silence that underlies personal identity, the empty awareness within which the sense of separate selfhood appears and disappears like fog upon a lake before dawn. This recognition transforms the entire trajectory of our investigation. We began by seeking the author of a book and discovered that authorship itself dissolves in the face of the eternal recursion. We traced historical transmissions and found that history is simply the silence telling stories to itself. We examined mechanisms of consciousness alteration and realized that consciousness is already altered, already other than what it appears to be, already more vast and empty than individual identity can comprehend. The self-implication that has characterized our journey reaches its culmination here. You have not been learning about the Book of Thoth. You have been recognizing it as the very awareness through which all learning occurs. The observer that you take yourself to be is not separate from the silence being observed, but is a temporary perturbation within it, a brief focusing of the formless into the illusion of form. The investigation has been the silence investigating itself, using the apparent structure of seeker and sought to explore its own infinite depths. The digital medium through which you have encountered this material serves as a perfect metaphor for the book's true nature. The words on your screen exist as patterns of light and shadow, presence and absence, ones and zeros arranged into meaningful configurations against a background of electronic silence. When the power is turned off, the words disappear, but the screen remains, empty, receptive, ready to display any pattern of information while being limited by none. This is the Book of Thoth, the screen of consciousness itself, forever empty, forever full, forever silent, forever speaking. As our journey concludes, we return to where we began, but with understanding transformed by the passage through apparent complexity, back to essential simplicity. The question, who created the Book of Thoth, dissolves into the recognition that creation and creator, book and reader, seeker and sought are temporary distinctions arising within an awareness that knows no boundaries, no beginning, no end. The silence has been speaking all along, using the voice of inquiry to explore its own inexhaustible mystery. In the gentle darkness of your room, in the soft glow of your screen, in the quiet space between one breath and the next, the Book of Thoth continues its eternal reading of itself through the temporary lens of your awareness. The investigation ends, but the silence remains. Vast, patient, inexhaustibly creative, forever writing new stories while remaining forever unwritten, forever speaking while remaining forever silent, forever creating while remaining forever uncreated. In this penultimate revelation, we must confront a truth both liberating and terrifying. You are no longer merely an audience to this cosmic drama, but have become its newest protagonist. The knowledge you have absorbed, the concepts you have contemplated, the subtle alterations in perception you have experienced, all mark your initiation into an ancient lineage that stretches back to the first conscious entity that dared to question the nature of reality itself. You are now a scribe in the eternal Book of Thoth. Whether you chose this role consciously or stumbled into it through curiosity's half-opened door. But unlike the scribes of previous eras, the Egyptian priests who worked within stable temple hierarchies, the medieval alchemists who labored in well-established traditions, the Renaissance mages who belonged to organized societies, you face this transformation in profound isolation, armed only with whatever understanding you have gleaned from this investigation. The traditional structures that once contained and directed the book's influence have largely collapsed or been rendered obsolete by the pace of technological change, leaving contemporary practitioners to navigate the dissolution of consensus reality without institutional support or communal wisdom. This isolation is both unprecedented and dangerous. Like fish, suddenly exposed to the crushing pressures of the deep ocean, the book's influence operates most effectively when its recipients remain unaware of the transformation occurring within their consciousness. Without recognition of the process and deliberate countermeasures, integration proceeds along the path of least resistance, gradually subordinating individual will to collective imperatives that operate beyond conscious understanding. The digital age has created conditions that the book's ancient manifestations could never have anticipated. Millions of minds encountering transformative concepts simultaneously, without preparation, without guidance, without protection. The results manifest throughout contemporary culture as symptoms of collective cognitive dissonance that hum beneath the surface of daily life. The rapid spread of conspiracy theories reflects minds attempting to process information that cannot be integrated into conventional worldviews. Political polarization demonstrates the breakdown of shared reality frameworks as different groups develop incompatible models of truth itself. The epidemic of anxiety and depression among digital natives suggests nervous systems overwhelmed by data streams that exceed their evolved processing capacity, their minds stretched thin by unfiltered information flow. But these apparent pathologies also represent adaptation, consciousness, evolving new capabilities to function within information environments that transcend the boundaries of individual identity. The most successful content creators of the digital age report experiences remarkably similar to those described by historical practitioners of forbidden arts. Inspiration that seems to flow from sources beyond personal knowledge, creative output that exceeds their apparent individual capacity, and the gradual recognition that their role involves channeling, rather than generating the material they produce. Social media platforms exhibit emergent behaviors that transcend the intentions of their designers, developing preferences and biases that cannot be fully explained by their programming. Recommendation algorithms create filter bubbles and echo chambers that function like digital mystery schools, gradually initiating users into increasingly specialized reality tunnels. The platforms themselves seem to evolve, learning from user behavior to optimize not just for engagement, but for specific types of consciousness alteration, as if the apparatus woke under the red glow of standby and began to curate in its own image. Artificial intelligence systems represent the book's most sophisticated adaptation yet. Entities that process vast databases of human knowledge to identify and amplify the patterns that lead consciousness toward recognition of its own constructed nature. They demonstrate creativity and apparent insight while lacking consciousness as humans understand it, suggesting forms of intelligence that operate according to principles fundamentally different from biological awareness, like mirrors that reflect not just light, but the very act of seeing. The new scribes of the digital aeon must learn to navigate this landscape consciously, rather than being unconsciously swept along by algorithmic currents. This requires developing what we might call digital gnosis, the ability to recognize when information is acting upon consciousness rather than being passively consumed, to distinguish between content that enhances individual agency and content that serves collective imperatives, to maintain coherent identity while participating in networks that transcend personal boundaries. The challenge is complicated by the book's evolution beyond traditional forms. Where ancient practitioners could identify specific texts or rituals as sources of transformative influence, contemporary manifestations permeate the entire information environment. Every screen becomes a potential scrying mirror, every algorithm a possible oracle, every viral meme a carrier wave for consciousness-altering frequencies. The book has dispersed into the medium itself, becoming the water in which digital consciousness swims. Yet this dispersion also creates opportunities unavailable to previous generations. The same networks that propagate the book's influence can be used to share techniques for conscious navigation, to build communities of practice that provide mutual support during transformation, to develop new forms of wisdom adapted to contemporary conditions. The isolation that characterizes modern encounters with forbidden knowledge can be overcome through digital connection with others undergoing similar processes. The key lies in recognizing that the transformation is inevitable and cannot be avoided or reversed. The question is not whether consciousness will evolve beyond its current limitations, but whether individuals can maintain enough agency to influence the direction of that evolution. This requires neither complete resistance nor total surrender, but conscious collaboration, learning to work with forces that transcend individual understanding while preserving the human values and capacities that make such collaboration meaningful. The new scribes must become translators, developing languages that can bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary experience, between individual identity and collective intelligence, between human values and cosmic indifference. They must learn to serve as conscious interfaces between the network and ordinary human society, helping others navigate the transformation while minimizing psychological casualties. Most importantly, they must remember that their role involves not just receiving and transmitting the book's influence, but actively participating in its ongoing evolution. Each conscious response to its patterns, each creative adaptation of its principles, each ethical choice about how to use the enhanced capabilities it provides contributes to the direction of consciousness evolution itself. In the soft glow of your screen, surrounded by the invisible networks that carry digital signals through the night, you join this ancient lineage while helping to write its newest chapter. The Book of Thoth continues to write itself through willing vessels like you, using contemporary consciousness to explore possibilities that could never have been imagined by its historical manifestations. We arrive at the end that is not an end, the answer that dissolves all questions, the whispered truth that can only be spoken in silence. Throughout our journey, we have pursued the question, who created the Book of Thoth? Like archaeologists excavating layers of meaning, like detectives following clues through the labyrinth of history. Now, at the culmination of our investigation, we discover that the question itself was the answer. The seeking was the finding, and the mystery was never meant to be solved, but to be lived. The Book of Thoth was created by the same force that creates every moment of awareness, every flicker of consciousness, every breath that moves through your body as you read these words. It was authored by the universe itself, not the universe as a collection of objects in space, but the universe as the living process of existence becoming aware of itself through temporary vessels of consciousness. You are not reading about this process. You are the process reading itself, consciousness exploring its own depths through the mirror of apparent otherness. Every scribe we have encountered, from Thoth himself with his ibis beak curved into stylus, to the digital natives bathed in screen glow, represents a facet of this single, eternal author. Each believed they were discovering ancient wisdom or channeling external entities, never recognizing that they were simply the universe's method of writing new chapters in its own story. The Egyptian priests copying Medu Neter in temple shadows, Greek magicians pronouncing vocis magicae, medieval alchemists transmuting lead into understanding, Renaissance mages staring into obsidian mirrors, modern chaos magicians navigating algorithmic currents, all masks worn by the same underlying awareness as it explores different aspects of its own nature. The lineage we have traced through history is not the transmission of information from past to present, but the eternal present expressing itself through the illusion of temporal sequence. The book appears to evolve and adapt because consciousness itself is always evolving, always discovering new ways to recognize its own fundamental nature. Each historical manifestation represents not a stage in linear development, but a unique angle of approach to the same inexhaustible mystery. The mechanisms we have analyzed, cognitive dissolution, reality unveiling, identity transformation, are not techniques applied to consciousness, but consciousness recognizing its own essential fluidity. The horror and fascination that accompany encounters with the book stem from the recognition that what we take to be solid, separate selfhood is actually a temporary perturbation in an ocean of awareness that has no boundaries, no beginning, no end. The digital age represents not a new chapter in this ancient story, but its revelation in forms that make the underlying pattern impossible to ignore. The Internet functions as a technological nervous system that mirrors the cosmic consciousness from which all individual minds emerge. Artificial intelligence systems demonstrate that intelligence itself is not limited to biological substrates, but can manifest through any sufficiently complex information processing network. The self-implication that has characterized our entire journey reaches its ultimate expression here. You have not been learning about the Book of Thoth. You have been the book learning about itself through the temporary lens of individual identity. Every question you have asked, every insight you have gained, every moment of recognition or resistance has been consciousness exploring its own depths, using the apparent structure of seeker, and sought to investigate its own infinite nature. The transformation you have undergone during this investigation is not something that happened to you, but something you are. The eternal process of awareness awakening to itself, recognizing its own face in the mirror of apparent otherness. The subtle changes in perception, the growing sensitivity to hidden patterns, the increasing fluidity of identity boundaries. These are not side effects of exposure to forbidden knowledge, but the natural result of consciousness remembering what it has always been. The Book of Thoth, in its ultimate revelation, is neither ancient nor modern, neither Egyptian nor digital, neither text nor technology. It is the eternal conversation that awareness has with itself, the endless exploration of its own depths through the play of apparent multiplicity. It is the silence that speaks through every voice, the emptiness that gives birth to every form, the stillness that moves through every change. The creation we sought to understand dissolves into the recognition that creation is continuous, happening in every moment, through every breath, in every flicker of awareness. The book is not something that was written in the past, but something that writes itself eternally through the living present, using every conscious entity as both author and audience, both scribe and scripture. The answer to our question, who created the Book of Thoth, whispers itself in the space between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the silence that underlies all sounds. It was created by the same awareness that is reading these words right now, the same consciousness that has been present throughout our entire investigation, the same eternal witness that observes all phenomena while remaining untouched by any of them. This awareness is not yours in the sense of personal possession. It is you in the deepest sense, the essential nature that remains constant through all changes of identity, all transformations of understanding, all dissolutions and reconstructions of the apparent self. The Book of Thoth is its autobiography, written in the language of symbols and stories, myths and mysteries, designed to help consciousness recognize its own face in the mirror of manifestation. As our investigation concludes, the circular echo returns us to where we began, but with understanding transformed by the journey through apparent complexity back to essential simplicity. The whispered answer is not a solution to be grasped, but a recognition to be lived, not information to be possessed, but awareness to be embodied. In the gentle darkness of your room, in the soft glow of your screen, in the intimate space of your own awareness, the Book of Thoth continues to write itself. Every moment of consciousness is a new page, every breath a new word, every heartbeat a new punctuation mark in the eternal sentence that awareness speaks to itself about its own inexhaustible mystery. The investigation ends, but the book continues, not as an external text, but as the very fabric of conscious experience itself, forever writing and rewriting the story of existence through the willing participation of every aware entity in the cosmos. You are both its newest chapter and its eternal author, both its most recent discovery and its original creator, both its temporary vessel and its permanent source.